One of my favorite trends that has been filtering down into affordable watches recently is 3D textured dials. And what I've noticed recently about these more affordable watches with these types of dials is just how good they are getting. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And it was definitely this 3D design that first drew me to this WatchDives release. Not just the design, however, it was also the proportions of it, the overall design of it, the color of the dial, and my prior knowledge about this particular watch company, because I've owned a couple of watches from WatchDives before, and they've been very good. And this particular one has definitely stood out to me beyond any of the other of their designs that I've seen. So when they actually reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to feature one of these new WD0005 watches? I said, yes, please. I would absolutely love to feature that one. I love to get hands-on with it. I would like for it to enter my own personal collection. And that's probably why you would have seen that sponsored icon up there, because this watch was supplied to me. And there's also going to be why I'm going to leave some links down below. And this one is the blue version that I got because, well, I do like blue, but there are another couple of color variations available too. And in fact, as you look at their website, you'll see that they are currently selling, well, as of the time of recording this episode, for 271 Australian dollars. And those other color variations do look quite good as well, because not only is there the blue, but there's also green, red, and purple. And what you'll also notice if you look at the specifications of this particular watch is that they are all available with the Seiko NH35. Now that is with a date complication, and this watch is available with and without date, but no matter which one you get the NH35. But it also has double dome sapphire crystal, 100 meters of tested water resistance, and they specify that on the website that it is tested water resistance, and you get a whole 3 years worth of warranty too. And it really is that 3D effect of this dial that really first captured my attention. But it wasn't until I got it in hand that I realized that it's not only just an interesting 3D effect, but it's also combined nicely with that blue fading, that sort of black on the outer down to more of a nicer blue in the center. But the dial, it's finished in almost a satin finish, which is really nice. Not being glossy means that it plays with the light a little bit differently. In fact, when you get this one out in the light, you'll see that that sort of satin style finish almost highlights those 3D ridges, and it creates a different light play, which makes it actually look more interesting when you're seeing it in light like you do outside. Now that logo, the minute markers, and all the other text on the dial is printed on in white, which I really quite like with this one because it links nicely with the Lume application. The Lume both in the hour and minute hand, but also on those markers. Having that really crisp white applied Lume really then mirrors that white printing that's on the dial. It helps to make it a more legible watch, breaking up that dark feature of the outer edge of the dial, but also at a glance legible because of that white contrast with the blue and black dial. And it is when you turn out the lights that you see that because they have put quite a bit of Lume in those hands and in those markers, that the Lume is actually really substantial as well, and it's really quite satisfying to see such a glow on this particular watch. Now, as you look down at the 6 o'clock, you will see that date complication. As I mentioned earlier, there is a no date and a date version. Obviously, I got the date variation, and it is nicely color matched too. But there is something that I've noticed about these color matched date wheels recently. Some look great, but they're not exactly legible, whereas others look great and they are very legible. This is one of those legible ones. So not only is it easy to tell the time, but it is also at a glance easy to tell what the date is. So sorry to interrupt, but I was just hoping if you are enjoying this video that you might just click on that subscribe button. Thank you very much. Let's get back to this video. Now, I mentioned that it is covered by a double domed sapphire crystal, and this is one of those crystals that almost disappears, which is very nice. They do list that it does have clear AR coating, and that certainly appears to be true. Now, obviously, I really like that dial, but let's put that aside at the moment because it's not just the dial that grabs my attention about this watch. It is also the style. This Garter style watch, this everyday style watch, is something that I'm finding very drawn towards, and a watch that is really easy to wear, especially when it is sized like this one, because the case itself is 39 millimeters. That seems to be a real sweet spot with watches at the moment. The height of the watch is 12.6, which is actually quite pleasant and really quite good for that Seiko NH35 movement. The lug to lug is super compact, being 45.4 millimeters, which means this one will fit a lot of people. The lug width is a standard 20, but it goes all the way down to 16, which is really noticeable when you're handling this watch. And it has a nice, comfortable weight of 123 grams. And as you put it onto my wrist, my 17 centimeter wrist, you'll see those sizes and those proportions fit well. And I have a medium size wrist, so I think this one, especially with that shorter lug to lug, will fit much smaller wrists, but I think it will equally look good on much larger wrists too. Now the case and that solid bezel are primarily brushed. The tops of those lugs and the sides of the case are brushed, and it is a very nice silky brush to it, but it is broken up by a couple of lines of polish. One on the bezel itself, just on the underside of it, and then there's that chamfer on the case. And I was a bit unexpected to see this one that has a semi-guarded crown. This style was not what I was expecting from this watch. Quite often these Garter style watches have an unguarded crown, but this one doesn't, and I really quite like that because it gives it something a little bit extra, a little bit of extra sort of dimensions on wrist, but also just another factor and detail of this case. Now, of course, having a Seiko NH35 means that this movement does have hacking and hand winding, and it is also a screw down crown giving you 100 meters of water resistance. And having that date complication means that there is two positions, which is worth keeping in mind, as I've already mentioned, because if you buy the no date variant of this watch, you'll still have that ghost position. Now the bracelet and clasp are both very good, but I'll say there's still a couple of improvements that I think that they could have. But let me concentrate on the positives first, because they certainly outweigh the negatives. Firstly, they are solid end links, and they are very good solid end links. Not only do they fit nicely into the case, not only do they look good, but they integrate in a way that it almost makes it stand out as one of the big features of this watch. Not always do the end links fit perfectly into the case. This watch, they fit perfectly. And as you look on the underside of those lugs, you'll see that they have quick release spring bars, which is very nice and a very useful feature. But the bracelet itself, it all has solid links, brushed on the top, polished on the side, and that's nice because it then matches in really nicely with the case. And as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of taper from 20 down to 16, and that tapers down to 16 to one of these small clasps. In fact, these are probably some of my favorite clasps on watches because it is quite thin. It sort of streamlines with the bracelet itself. This one also has plenty of micro adjust, and it is all milled inside. There's no on-the-fly adjustment, but that is something that I'm willing to give up when it comes to this sort of style, this sort of size, because it makes it nice and thin and sit down nicely on the underside of your wrist. But I mentioned that this is not a perfect bracelet. There are a couple of things that I think could definitely be improved, and that includes the split pins that hold this bracelet together, because I don't tend to mind split pins, but this particular bracelet, it was fiddly to resize. In fact, I was a little bit worried that the split pins would fall out after I had resized it. I'd had to put a lot more time and thought and put some effort in to ensure that they were firmly within the bracelet. And it does have a slight jingly, jangly feel to it. Firstly, sort of in your hand, but I also hear that little jingle occasionally whilst the watch is on the wrist. But as you look past that, you'll see the case back of this watch is fairly simple and not really much more to talk about when it comes to that case back. So overall, there's very little to say from a negative perspective about this watch. A couple of little improvements on that bracelet, but the watch head itself, the watch dial itself, is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm really enjoying having this one in my collection. I really enjoy this style, this Garter style, with these interesting dials that are well made and that play with the light nicely, and great sets of dimensions as well. And I find that I am being drawn to this type of watch since I now have a couple in my collection that I feel are similar. A little bit like my Martin SN0144, albeit different watches. They kind of had the same sort of feel to them, being garter watches with interesting dials. The same as my Aliexpress Ascent. Different watches again, but again had that same sort of everyday ease of wear use. And that is why in the future, I'm actually probably going to feature this WatchDives watch again, because I want to compare it, especially against that San Martin. And I want to especially compare it against that because they are similar in similar ways, except for the WatchDives is half the price of the San Martin. So it'll be interesting to see when I put these watches side by side, whether or not the San Martin is worth twice the amount of money. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please stay tuned for that upcoming comparison between these two watches. But whilst you wait for that, maybe you could watch one of my other videos next.